My wife, Emily, had always been predictable. She was the kind of woman who thrived on structure, someone who found comfort in routine and rarely strayed from her carefully planned days. So when she casually announced over breakfast that she had signed up for meditation classes, I was caught off guard. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, hands moving animatedly as she explained how V-Harmony, some new holistic program, was supposed to bring balance and peace into her life. Her excitement was so intense that she nearly knocked over her tea. I nodded along, doing my best to act interested, but something about it didn't sit right. Emily wasn't the type to make impulsive decisions, especially not about something so out of character. Still, I brushed it off. Stress gets to everyone, right? Maybe this was just her way of coping. I had a busy day ahead, deadlines looming, emails piling up. There was no time to dwell on it. As she left the house that morning, a small duffel bag slung over her shoulder caught my eye. It wasn't her usual purse or work bag. In fact, I couldn't remember ever seeing it before. I watched her walk out the door, my gaze lingering for a moment longer than usual. But then my phone buzzed with work notifications, and within minutes, my mind was consumed by tasks, deadlines, and meetings. Hours passed in a blur. Sometime around noon, my phone buzzed again. This time, a message from my best friend, Jake. "Let's grab drinks tonight." "I need a break," he texted. Classic Jake. He was always the type to crave an escape from work, eager to unwind at the end of a long day. I shot back a quick, maybe. Depends on how things go here, before returning my focus to my laptop. The day sped by, and before I knew it, I had wrapped things up earlier than expected. The idea of meeting Jake sounded more appealing than usual, so I called to confirm. To my surprise, his tone was off, clipped, uncharacteristically distant. "Busy with work," he said quickly, before ending the call without his usual banter. I stared at my phone, puzzled. Jake never bailed on our nights out, especially not the ones he planned himself. It was weird, but I let it slide, figuring he must have been swamped. That evening, as I mindlessly scrolled through social media, something caught my eye. A mutual acquaintance had posted a picture from a nearby restaurant, a casual group dinner, a table crowded with drinks and plates of half-eaten food. But it wasn't the meal that grabbed my attention. In the blurred reflection of a wall mirror, a figure stood out. The posture. The silhouette of the hair. It looked just like Emily. I squinted, leaning closer to my phone screen, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. The reflection wasn't crystal clear, but the resemblance was undeniable. When Emily walked through the door later that night, she was glowing. Not the usual post-work exhaustion, not the drained look of someone who had spent hours meditating. No. She was radiant. Her hair was freshly styled, makeup flawless, and there was a lightness in her step, like she had just walked off a movie set rather than a supposedly introspective meditation session. "Hey, babe," she greeted, leaning down to kiss me on the cheek before heading straight to the kitchen to pour herself a glass of water. I watched her from my spot on the couch, casually asking about her meditation class. She launched into a detailed explanation, breathing exercises, mindfulness techniques, philosophical discussions on self-awareness. It all sounded rehearsed. Too smooth, like she had memorized the words on her way home. I nodded, playing along, then threw in a casual remark as if it were an afterthought. "Oh, I passed by that new restaurant earlier," I said, keeping my voice light. Place looked packed. Thought I saw someone I recognized. Maybe even Jake. Her reaction was immediate, but controlled. Her brow furrowed, just for a second, before she shrugged. "Yeah, I think I saw him too," she said smoothly. "Didn't talk, though. I was in a rush to catch the bus." The way she said it, so effortlessly, nearly convinced me. Almost. But there was something off about the way she delivered that line. It was too polished, too ready. Like she had rehearsed it. I let it go. For now. That night, as she moved around the kitchen, seemingly unbothered, I sat in silence, replaying the day's events over and over in my head. The duffel bag. The strange text from Jake. The restaurant photo. The suspiciously smooth explanation. Emily had never been one for elaborate stories. She was a straight shooter, never felt the need to embellish or over-explain. But tonight, she was careful, calculated, and that was enough to set me on edge. I didn't push her. Not yet. But I knew, deep down, something was wrong. Emily was hiding something. And I was going to find out what. I woke up earlier than usual the next morning, a strange restlessness settling over me before I even opened my eyes. The first thing I noticed was the sound of movement coming from the kitchen. Emily was already up. That was unusual. She was never an early riser, especially not after a long day. Usually, I was the one making breakfast while she groggily stumbled out of bed, still half asleep. Curious, I stayed in bed for a few more minutes, just listening. There was a rhythmic clinking of dishes, the low hum of the coffee machine, and, was she humming? Emily never hummed in the mornings. I finally got up and made my way to the kitchen. She was standing at the counter, slicing fruit, an easy smile on her face. The energy she radiated was almost unsettling. "Morning," she chirped, flashing me a bright smile. "Morning," I said slowly, watching her. "You're up early." She shrugged, popping a grape into her mouth. "Didn't sleep much. Figured I'd make the most of it." I poured myself a cup of coffee, still observing her. She wasn't just awake, she was excited. Almost giddy. "Another meditation session today?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. She nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah. This one's out of town. A little retreat, you know? They say being in nature helps you get deeper into the practice." Her explanation was logical enough, but there was something about the way she said it that made my stomach tighten. Like she was feeding me just enough information to make it sound believable, but not enough to invite questions. I took a slow sip of coffee. "Out of town, huh? Where exactly?" She hesitated. Just for a split second. "Oh, just outside the city. Nothing fancy," she said quickly. "It's more about the atmosphere than the location." I nodded, filing that away for later. As she packed up her things, I caught sight of that same duffel bag from yesterday sitting on the counter. She was adding a few last-minute items, but something inside the bag caught my eye, a small, neatly wrapped package. It wasn't big, but the way she slid it into the bag quickly, almost hiding it, made me pause. "What's that?" I asked, keeping my voice light. She glanced at me briefly, then zipped the bag shut before I could get a better look. "Oh, just a little thank you gift for one of the instructors," she said smoothly. "They've been really helpful." Another perfectly reasonable answer. And yet, it didn't sit right. I wanted to ask more, to press her for details, but I held back. Instead, I just smiled and nodded. "That's nice of you." She leaned in, kissed me on the cheek, and walked out the door. The moment she was gone, an uneasy feeling settled in my chest. The way she had hidden that package. The way her energy didn't match the story she was telling. It wasn't adding up. I tried to shake it off, throwing myself into work, but my focus kept slipping. My mind kept circling back to that bag. That package. The strange lightness in her voice when she spoke about this so-called retreat. Eventually, the curiosity became too much. I decided to do something I had never done before. I started searching. Not in a paranoid, tearing the house apart kind of way, just a quiet, careful inspection. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I hoped I'd find something that would either confirm or dismiss my suspicions. It didn't take long. In our bedroom, sitting on her nightstand, was something that made my stomach clench, a set of keys. And they weren't hers. They belonged to Jake. I picked them up, turning them over in my hand, my mind racing. Jake had moved into a new apartment months ago. Emily had borrowed his spare keys once while helping him move, but she had returned them a long time ago. Hadn't she? There was no reason for her to still have them. None at all. I stood there for a long moment, gripping the keys, feeling the weight of what they meant. I wanted to call Jake right then and there, demand an explanation. But I stopped myself. If something was going on, he wouldn't just admit it. I had to be smarter than that. Instead, I carefully placed the keys back where I found them, took a deep breath, and stepped away. For the rest of the day, I forced myself to act normal. I went about my work, responded to emails, even made small talk when Emily texted me in the afternoon with a casual "hope your day's going well." But beneath the surface, my mind was working overtime. That evening, I decided to test the waters. I called Jake, keeping my tone easygoing. "Hey man, quick question. Emily still holding on to your spare keys? There was a pause. Just a little too long. Then he laughed, but it sounded forced.
Oh, yeah.
Totally forgot about those. I actually asked her to return them through you. His answer didn't sit right. Jake wasn't the type to forget details like that. And why would he have Emily return them through me when he could just get them from her himself? I didn't call him out on it. I just let the conversation end, but by the time I hung up, my suspicions had grown into something undeniable. Later that night, I scrolled through social media again, half distracted, my thoughts consumed by everything I had learned today. And then, another piece of the puzzle fell into place. Jake had posted something about working late. But in the comments, someone mentioned a restaurant, the same one Emily had talked about earlier. The coincidence was too big to ignore. I clicked through the photos, looking for anything else. I wasn't sure what I expected to find, but my gut told me that something was there. And sure enough, there it was. A familiar shape. A blurred figure in the background. Emily. At that moment, everything clicked into place. The bag. The gift she hid. The way she spoke about her so-called retreat. The keys. Jake's off responses. I didn't have proof yet, not the kind that could end this with certainty. But I had enough. Enough to know that something wasn't right. Enough to know that Emily was lying. And I was going to find out exactly what she was hiding. By the next morning, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to sit back and let doubt eat me alive. I needed real answers. Concrete proof. Emily was still asleep when I woke up. I lay there for a few moments, staring at the ceiling, running through everything I had noticed over the past couple of days. The bag. The hidden package. The keys. The way Jake had stumbled over his words. It was all leading somewhere, and I had a sick feeling I knew exactly where. I quietly got out of bed, careful not to wake her, and headed to the living room. I had a plan. For years, Emily and I had agreed to share our locations with each other through a tracking app. It had started as a safety thing, just a way to make sure we knew where the other person was in case of an emergency. I had never actually used it before, but today, I was making an exception. I pulled up the app and tapped on her name. My heartbeat slowed as I watched the little blue dot appear on the map. She wasn't heading out of town. She wasn't even leaving the city. She was going straight to Jake's neighborhood. A cold wave of realization crashed over me. This was it. This wasn't paranoia. It wasn't just some weird gut feeling. She had lied, flat out, blatantly lied, to my face. I clenched my jaw, staring at the screen. I could have confronted her right then, demanded an explanation the second she walked through the door that evening. But no. That was too easy. Too predictable. I needed more. I needed undeniable proof. So, I got dressed, grabbed my keys, and headed out the door. I wasn't reckless about it. I didn't want to get caught following her, didn't want to give her the chance to weasel her way out of this with more lies. Instead, I drove to a spot near Jake's apartment where I could keep an eye on things without being noticed. Minutes ticked by. Then, right on cue, Emily's car appeared. I watched from a safe distance as she pulled up, turned off the engine, and stepped out. She looked around, almost nervously, before heading inside. That alone was enough to send a surge of anger through me. She wasn't just casually visiting a friend. She was checking to make sure no one was watching. Except I was watching. She disappeared into the building, and I clenched the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My first instinct was to march right in, but I forced myself to stay put. If I confronted her now, she'd have excuses lined up, ready to deflect and manipulate the situation. I needed something she couldn't talk her way out of. So, I waited. Minutes turned into an hour. An hour turned into 2. Eventually, she reappeared, looking just as composed as when she had arrived. She wasn't flustered, wasn't in a rush. She looked like someone who had just spent the afternoon exactly where she wanted to be. She got back into her car and drove off. I sat there for a few minutes, letting the weight of what I had just witnessed settle in. I wasn't surprised, not really. Deep down, I had known. But seeing it with my own eyes was different. This was real. Emily was cheating on me. And not just with anyone, with my best friend. A slow, steady sense of clarity washed over me. I wasn't going to be the guy who got played. I wasn't going to let them walk all over me and pretend nothing was happening. They thought they were being clever. They thought they were getting away with it. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. That night, when Emily walked through the door, she wore the same bright smile she had the night before. The same fake, carefully crafted expression that she thought I wouldn't question. I played my part. "How was the retreat?" I asked casually. She launched into another perfectly rehearsed speech about mindfulness meditation, how refreshing it had been to get away from the noise of the city. I nodded along, pretending to believe every word. But inside, I was already planning my next move. I wasn't just going to catch them. I was going to destroy them. I barely slept that night. I lay there, staring at the ceiling while Emily slept soundly beside me, completely unaware that the walls were closing in on her. Every detail, every lie, every carefully rehearsed excuse played over and over in my head. But I wasn't just stewing in anger, I was strategizing. If I wanted to dismantle their little fantasy world, I had to be smart. I had to be patient. By the time morning rolled around, I was ready to make my first move. Emily woke up looking refreshed, stretching lazily as she blinked over at me. "You're up early." "Big day at work," I lied smoothly. "Got a lot to handle." She smiled, completely unaware that she was the one about to be handled. I watched her go about her morning routine, sipping coffee, scrolling through her phone. Her body language was relaxed, too relaxed for someone juggling a double life. She really thought she had me fooled. I let her go about her day as if nothing had changed, but the moment she was out the door, I got to work. First, I needed to know just how deep this went. I opened her laptop, the one she barely used but never bothered to log out of her accounts on. A few clicks, and I was in. Emails, messages, search history. I went through everything methodically, making sure not to leave a trace. And then I found it. A hidden chat app. One I had never seen before. My pulse quickened as I opened it. There, at the top of the messages, was a conversation with a contact saved under a single letter, J. Jake. I clicked. The messages were worse than I had imagined. "Can't stop thinking about last night. I wish we had more time together. When can I see you again?" And Emily's replies? Just as incriminating. "You know I'd be with you all the time if I could. I hate sneaking around, but it's worth it. This weekend, same place?" I scrolled further, scanning weeks of messages filled with inside jokes, confessions, plans. They weren't just having an affair. They were in love. Or at least, they thought they were. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen, letting it all sink in. The betrayal wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Deep. I clenched my jaw, exhaling slowly, forcing myself to stay in control. This wasn't about anger. This was about justice. I copied the messages, saved screenshots, and backed everything up to a secure folder. Then, I moved to the next phase. Jake had vulnerabilities, ones I had ignored before, but now? Now they were weapons. His job in construction came with a lot of financial responsibility. He had a habit of cutting corners, and I had long suspected that some of his contracts weren't entirely legitimate. I had never cared before. But now it was my business. A few calls to the right people, a little digging through public records, and I had what I needed. Invoices that didn't add up. Projects that seemed to disappear from his books. Payments that didn't have clear recipients. Fraud. And now I had proof. Emily and Jake thought they were being careful. Thought they had me fooled. But they had no idea what was coming. By the time Emily walked through the door that evening, her betrayal was no longer just a suspicion or even a certainty. It was a weapon. She smiled at me like nothing had changed, kissed my cheek, poured herself a glass of wine. And I played along. For now. For the next few days, I played my role to perfection. I was the same husband Emily had always known, calm, steady, predictable. I smiled at her over breakfast, kissed her goodnight, asked about her so-called meditation retreats with just the right amount of detached curiosity. But beneath the surface, I was orchestrating her downfall. I wasn't going to confront her outright. That would give her a chance to twist things, to manipulate, to cry and beg and make excuses. No, I needed to dismantle everything before she even realized what was happening. So, I set the trap. Emily's retreat was coming up again that weekend, another excuse to disappear for a few hours, probably right into Jake's bed. And I was going to let her go. But this time, I wasn't just watching from the sidelines. This time, I was going to be inside the story she thought she was writing. The first step was making sure her lies caught up to her. I started with Jake. Thanks to the records I had gathered, I had a clear picture of his fraudulent activities. I sent an anonymous tip to an investigative journalist who specialized in exposing corruption. Just a simple email, attaching copies of invoices, transaction records, and contracts that didn't quite add up. Within hours, the journalist responded, curious, eager. A story was already forming. But that wasn't enough. I wanted Jake to feel the walls closing in from every direction. So, I reached out to one of his biggest clients. A little strategic email, pointing them toward the same financial discrepancies. No accusations, just enough breadcrumbs to make them start asking the right questions. By the time Jake woke up the next morning, his phone would be blowing up with inquiries he couldn't answer. And then, there was Emily. Her job had always been her pride. She was careful, meticulous, except when it came to keeping work and personal life separate. A deeper dive into her emails had revealed something else, careless leaks of company information. She had sent confidential reports through her personal email, discussed sensitive projects with people she shouldn't have, and even shared internal documents with Jake. She probably thought nothing of it. But her employer wouldn't see it that way. A neatly compiled email, complete with attachments, was sent directly to her company's compliance officer. Again, no direct accusations. Just the truth, laid out in a way that couldn't be ignored. The moment they looked into it, she'd be under investigation. And then, the final piece of my plan, the exposure. I wasn't going to let them hide behind secrets anymore. On the day of her retreat, I told Emily I had a last-minute work trip, an excuse to be gone so she wouldn't suspect anything. She smiled, kissed me goodbye, and left, completely oblivious. I waited until she was comfortably settled at Jake's place. Thanks to the location tracker, I knew exactly when that happened. Then, I made my move. I sent a carefully worded message to a group chat that included our closest friends and some of her family. Hey everyone, just wanted to clear something up. Emily's not at a meditation retreat today. She's at Jake's apartment. In case anyone was wondering. And just to make sure there was no misunderstanding, I attached a photo, a live location screenshot of her phone, sitting in Jake's neighborhood. I imagined the way her phone must have lit up with incoming messages. The confusion. The panic. But that was just the beginning. The moment she left Jake's apartment that evening, she was walking into a different world, one where her job, her reputation, her entire life was falling apart. By the time she got home, I'd be waiting. And she wouldn't see it coming. The moment Emily walked through the front door that evening, I knew. She had seen the messages. Her face was pale, her hands clenched tightly around the strap of her purse. Her usual confident, carefree demeanor was gone, replaced with something raw. Desperation. I sat on the couch, completely calm. A glass of whiskey rested in my hand, the ice clinking softly as I swirled it. She stood there for a moment, staring at me like she was trying to figure out if she could still salvage this. Then she spoke. I can explain. I almost laughed. I leaned back, taking my time with my response. No, Emily. You really can't. She hesitated, her lips pressing together, her mind racing. It's not what it looks like, she stammered. Jake and I held up a hand, cutting her off. Stop. Just stop. She swallowed hard. For a long moment, the room was silent, the weight of everything hanging between us like a thick fog. Then, I spoke again, my voice even. Your job. Your affair. Jake's little financial secrets. It's all out in the open now. She flinched. What do you mean? I reached for my phone and tapped the screen. Check your email. And while you're at it, you might want to check your messages. I think your family and friends have a few questions for you. Her phone buzzed in her hand, and I saw the way her face changed as she unlocked it. Her breath hitched. Her fingers trembled. I watched as the messages flooded in, her sister, her mother, her co-workers. Emily, What the hell is going on? Is this true? I can't believe this. After everything. She looked back up at me, eyes wide, as if she was pleading for some kind of mercy. But there was none left. You thought you were careful, I said quietly. Thought you could play me for a fool. I shook my head, taking a slow sip of my drink. But you underestimated me. Tears welled up in her eyes. I made a mistake. No, I corrected, setting my glass down. A mistake is something you regret the second it happens. You planned this. You lied, over and over again. You looked me in the eye every single day and pretended to be someone you're not. She tried to move toward me, but I stood up, stepping back. Don't. Her breath shuddered. I don't want to lose you. I let out a cold chuckle. Emily, you lost me the second you decided to crawl into bed with my best friend. The words hit her like a slap. She swayed slightly, as if she could physically feel the weight of them. I walked over to the hallway and grabbed something, a packed suitcase, waiting by the door. I set it in front of her. You're leaving. She blinked, as if she hadn't processed the words. Wait, what? You don't live here anymore, I said simply. I already spoke to a lawyer. The divorce papers are being finalized. Your things are packed. You have until tonight to get the rest. She shook her head, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. You can't just. I can. And I did. For the first time, I saw real panic in her eyes. She opened her mouth, as if to argue, but then her phone buzzed again. Another message. This one, from her boss. Emily, we need to talk. First thing tomorrow. Her breath hitched, and she finally seemed to grasp the full weight of what I had done. Her job was gone. Her affair was exposed. Her entire life, everything she thought she could keep hidden, was in ruins. I watched as she crumbled, her shoulders shaking, her hands gripping the suitcase like it was the only thing anchoring her to reality. But I felt nothing. No pity. No sadness. Just the cold, steady satisfaction of a man who had taken back control of his life. I stepped back, gesturing toward the door. It's over, Emily. Get out. She stared at me for a long moment, as if she was waiting for me to change my mind. But I didn't. Eventually, she turned, dragging the suitcase behind her. She paused at the doorway, glancing back one last time. Do you really hate me that much? She whispered. I met her gaze, my voice devoid of emotion. I don't hate you. I nothing you. She swallowed, nodded once, then stepped out into the night. And just like that, she was gone. I let out a slow breath, feeling a strange, unfamiliar weight lift off my shoulders. The house was quiet now. But for the first time in a long, long time, so was my mind. I poured myself another drink, walked onto the porch, and lit a cigar, watching as the smoke curled into the cold night air. Emily and Jake had spent months building their fantasy world, believing they were untouchable. Now, they were left to pick up the shattered pieces. And me. I was free. Completely, utterly free. The war was over. And I had won. Thank you for visited my YouTube channel. Your support, likes, and comments truly inspire me to create even more engaging content. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. You're a part of this amazing community, and I'm thrilled to share my stories with you. See you in the next video on YouTube.